I'm Owen Bigland. This is the Inside Edge video blog. Okay, big news. The NDP just announced their annual prescribed allowable rent increase to us landlords, both mom and pop landlords as well as large institutional landlords that own apartment rental buildings, purpose-built rentals, for 2023. And not surprisingly, it is just a made-up number. I don't know where they get their math from. It's some special socialist math that they use, but it is going to be 2%, a allowable rent increase of 2% for 2023. So this is far below what the prescribed rate should have been based on the calculations for CPI. But if you watched my blog earlier in the summer, I forewarned you about this. There is no honor among thieves when you're dealing with the NDP government or with any type of socialist government. And I forewarned you guys that I said, this is going to be funny. It's going to be interesting. They are not going to honor what they should have, which is the CPI number for the allowable increase. They will finagle this or do something here. And that's exactly what they did. Now, where they came up with the 2%, I have no idea. Maybe someone can tell me. I don't really care. To be honest, I told you guys, I avoid any interaction with the government as much as possible. I just do my own thing. And I personally have insulated myself against any reliance on the government whatsoever. They're all inept, not just the NDP, but the Liberals. They're all the same pretty much, although the left-leaning socialists are especially a problem and will drive most people into the ground if you give them long enough time in office. But 2%, I saw an article just came out in Business in Vancouver. They said that according to the proper calculations on CPI, the inflation rate, that number should have been 5.4%. 5.4% is the proper math on this. NDP, though, no way, is 2%. So let me unravel this for you guys. There are so many moving parts with this. I already see what I would call simpletons, people that don't have a lot of experience in real estate or the rental market or the dynamics of how rents, supply, demand work. They're already saying, well, 2% increase, of course, us landlords, our costs have gone up far more than 2%. Insurance in the last couple of years has gone up 200%. Maintenance fees, property taxes are all up double digit. So the simpleton approach is, well, investors are going to head for the exits with a 2% rent increase and only 1.5 for this year and a rent freeze for 2 years. Enough is enough. These landlords will be heading for the exits and selling their properties. That's not going to be the case, because what they don't understand is, have you looked at what the rental rates are now in Vancouver? They have gone completely parabolic, and they will continue that way with this type of hoodwinking that the NDP is doing with this new 2023 rent increase. Just to give you an example here, one-bedroom condos in downtown Vancouver in January of 2020 that were getting, let's call it $2,100, $2,150 a month. Today, those same units are getting $2,700, $2,750, $2,800, $2,900 a month. $2,100 in January of 2020, those are getting $2,800, $2,900 today. So that is the effect of when you start stifling what landlords can charge. Because keep in mind, let's just set the table here first, a couple of things. I don't want to get it too unwieldy here, and I want to make sure you guys understand all the dynamics that are at play here. So up until the NDP came into power 4 years ago, for the last several decades, as long as I can remember, I've been a landlord for over 35 years now. I represent hundreds of clients, investor clients, that have been in this market for decades, mom and pop investors. So I've got a pretty good handle on the dynamics of the rental market and prices and rents and everything else. But up until the NDP came into power, you were allowed to, the prescribed rent was CPI, or the inflation rate, plus 2%. NDP came into power and said, hey, we're going to eliminate that plus 2%. That's just too much. You're getting greedy. Even though, CPI plus 2 was still not enough to cover the annual increases to hold a property. But I told you guys back then, I never increased rents on my, automatically increased rents on my tenants. Neither did my father or probably the majority of the hundreds of investors I have. We always, if we got a good tenant, they were taking care of the place, not bothering us, we left the rents run. Well, that's all changed now. Part of the reason is, the cost to hold these properties has gone up dramatically the last 3 or 4 years. But I can tell you rents have spiked here, especially the last 3 years. So in the olden days, let's call it 10 years ago, I would have tenants that would stay for 3 or 4 years in a unit. I would never increase the rent. They were good tenants. It's a lot of work to get a new tenant. So I would leave the rent the same. But it wasn't that big of a deal because they might stay for 2.5 or 3 years, and by the time they moved out, I might be able to bump the rent up maybe $130, $150, maybe $200 more a month. Well, that's not the case anymore. Now rents are spiked so much that if a guy's in there for 3 years, you might be $700, $800 light on your rent. So now, of course, and a lot of my long-term investors have gone from not raising rent to automatically giving you all the tenants a subscribed rent increase, which I've done this year. I just did it, gave them the 3-month notice to all my tenants, and I will be doing it next year as well. I'll give them the 2%. So it's caused some people that had rental stability to not have that anymore. But keep in mind that as a mom and pop investor, renting stratified condos, it is much different than the large institutional investors that own a 60-unit apartment building in the West End, or perhaps a Aquilini or a Boza that have some newer, purposely built 250, 300-unit towers. They are much more impacted by this because the mom and pop investor like myself, I've got a number of ways to raise that rent. Eventually the tenants will leave. They always do. Maybe they stay 2 years, 3 years, who knows? But when they do, I can raise that rent back up to full market rent. I can also now, which I'm doing, is at least it makes up for some of it. It still doesn't cover my increased costs, but start giving them the prescribed annual increase every single year, which I'm doing now. The other thing, though, is you can, as a mom and pop investor, you can sell the unit at any time. Once that the 1-year lease is expired or is done, it goes month to month indefinitely. Once it goes month to month, a owner can go to that tenant and say, listen, I'm selling the property. I'm going to list it next week. And once I get an accepted offer with the subject removed, I will give you 2 clear months and you must vacate. You've got no recourse with that. Or you do the route I do usually when we sell a tenanted property is we get the tenant to sign a mutual agreement to end tenancy. Much better deal for all parties. We tell the tenant, listen, we're going to sell it with or without you. What we'll do is if you're out in 40 days or 30 days, we'll give you 2 months rent compensation. Again, if you don't want to sign it, no problem. We'll just list it with you in it. But the easier way to go is sign the mutual agreement to end tenancy. We'll give you $6,000 credit and you'll be out in 35 days. And then we'll sell it vacant and I can get a much better price for my seller that way. The other ways are, as a mom and pop, is the owner at any time can give the tenant notice and say, I've decided I'm going to move back into the home. I'm giving you 2 clear months and I'm coming back in. Or my daughter is going to move into it, or my son is going to move into the unit, and the tenant has to be out. So eventually you'll get those back up to market rents, or move into it, or sell it, or whatever else. Institutional investors owning these apartment buildings, they are much harder hit by this. Generally those tenants, once they're in there for 3 or 4 years and the rents keep going up, they stay. Because now they know that if I get rid of this unit and give notice, I've got to wade into the current market, which is going to cost me $600, $700, $800, $1,000 more a month for what I'm currently renting now. So they are much more impacted by this. They can't sell the unit. They can't move into the unit. And those tenants, after a few years, if they haven't moved and the way the rents are going right now, they're going to stay. So they are heavily hit. So point I'm going to make here is that, as you guys know, I've done lots of blogs on this for the past 40 years, up until about 6 or 7 years ago. Nothing had been built here as far as new purposely built rentals. That changed about 5 or 6 years ago. And I can't get into all the details, but I can tell you that the government was desperate, absolutely desperate, cap in hand to these developers to please build us some rental stock, build us some purposely built modern rental buildings, because we have not had anything built since the 1960s or 1970s in the West End. It's dilapidated. So the developers, I've told you guys in other blogs, are not in the property management business. They're not in wanting to buy and hold properties as rentals. It's not what they're in business for. They're developers. They want to secure a piece of land, run it through the NIMBYs, run it through the approval process, get the zoning, hire an architect, get the construction, hire a marketing company, pre-sell them, build the tower, sell the units, make their money and move on to the next one. They don't want to build rental housing and keep it, and takes 20 or 30 years to get their money back. But the city of Vancouver was desperate, and they would give these developers so many incentives. What they do is you build us a 150 unit tower, we will up your density on your next 3 developments, and we'll give you all kinds of tax abatements and everything else. That's the only way they could get them to build the few newer towers that have been built in the last 5 years. I think Aquilini put one up, Bose has put a couple up. Now, with this new 2% measly increase for 2023, remember, the NDP froze rent increases for 2 full years during COVID, which was almost criminal, really. Because what they thought was, hey, I understand, the tenants were hit by COVID, they've lost their jobs, the world shut down. But they obviously thought that the landlord, the owners of these units, weren't affected by COVID in any way. They don't lose their jobs. They didn't have any complications because of COVID, which was an absolute joke. Many of these landlords, mom and pops, were in the same boat as the tenants. They lost their jobs too. The bank, though, didn't give them any reprieve on their mortgage payments. Property taxes still had to be paid. Maintenance fees still had to be paid. This is typical socialism. All the property owners are fat cat multimillionaires, but the renters, of course, need a break. Froze rent for 2 full years, then last year, instead of giving us a 3 or 4% increase, gave us 1.5, and now they're kicking in the head again, giving you 2% for next year, 2023, when it should be 5.4. So we've had allowable 3.5% over the last 4 years, 3.5%. Yet insurance is up 250%, property tax is probably up 30% over the last 4 years, maintenance fees up that amount, 30-40%, repair costs, everything is skyrocketed. And they've given us 3.5% over the last 4 years. So again, what this is going to do is put the final nail in the coffin to any new purposely built rentals you're going to see coming down. There's none being built now anyways. There's a few projects that are finishing up. But do you think that a developer, they didn't want to get in bed with the government to begin with, but they gave them so many incentives that a few developers stepped up and said, hey, why not? We'll diversify our business a little bit. Not a bad idea too. We'll build a rental building and, we'll collect the rents. It's steady cash flow. But they do not want to get into bed or into partnership with the government. Who does? Especially the NDP. It's like that running joke that Kevin O'Leary has on Shark's Tank. His biggest nightmare that he keeps having, a reoccurring dream, is that the phone rings and it's at the other end, it's the government, and they're saying, hey, we want to go into partnership with you, or we're here to help you. God, I can't, there's nobody worse to be in. So you think that these developers, do not want to be in bed with any type of partnership with the government, especially a socialist government. You've got inflation running crazy. The NDP is only giving you a measly 2% when your costs are going up double digits. Why on earth would I want to build a rental building, purposely built rental building, to get into that situation where I'm losing money every year? The costs go up, but you won't let me raise the rent. The tenant stays forever. 5 years later, that apartment could be renting at $3 and they're still paying $2,200. It's nuts. So the NDP, all governments essentially, they don't understand simple economics, as I've stated many times here. They think that taxation and restrictions are elastic when they are inelastic. There's always when you put in a new wrinkle or a new tax or new restrictions, there's a reaction to that. So the reaction is that rents have spiked, have gone completely berserk here, gone from $2,100 to $2,900. But hey, the NDP doesn't let you know about that, doesn't talk much about that. Where they get you is, you see, we're working for the little guy here, Mr. Renter. We're helping you out. Instead of them being able to raise rent 5.5%, we're only letting them raise the rent 2%. What they don't go on to say is, hey, the rent that I was paying $2,000 a month for, I'm now paying $2,600 a month for. It's kind of like investors that chase yield. It's one of the worst things you can do as an investor in the stock market is what's called chasing yield. In other words, buying companies that pay an exorbitantly high dividend, a 6, 7, 8, 9% dividend. The reason for that, if they did a little homework, they would realize that the stock price is usually cratered, which has bumped up the dividend. That dividend is never sustainable. It's either going to be cut or eliminated very soon. But the other thing is, sure, you're getting the 7% dividend, but the stock is in free fall. The stock is losing 15% this year, 12% next year. So hey, I'm getting a 7% dividend. What good is that when the price of the stock is going down 12 or 15% every year? That's the way this is. The NDP is hoodwinking these people. They're saying we're going to keep the rental allowable rental increase cap. We're going to make it far below what it should be. And they're thinking, oh, this is great. They're looking out for me. But of course, they're getting it the other end 10 times worse. You're saving $20 a month on your rent, not being allowed, the landlord not being able to raise it, but your monthly rent has gone up $700, $800 in the last 2 years. It's ridiculous. People need to open their eyes to what's going on here. And it's only going to get worse because, again, forget about any new purposely built rentals moving forward. There's been very few anyways, nothing up until about 5 years ago. For 40 years here, developers wouldn't touch it. The only reason they did lately, here the last 3 or 4 years, is because all these sweetheart deals that the city of Vancouver will never talk about. They were giving away the farm to a lot of these developers. You know, developers are far, far smarter than who's working at City Hall. I think everyone knows that. They just laugh and laugh at these guys at City Hall. You know, if they want to get more density, they're going to play hardball with the city. They're going to say to themselves, well, you know, if they want 45 stories on another project to get more density, they're going to go into the city and say, hey, we want 55 stories, knowing full well that, hey, the city will want to do their little negotiating and they'll wheel them down to 45 or 46 thinking we got a good deal on it. And then the developer just laughs. You know, of course, we ask for this, we'll probably settle here, which is still fine with us. So, you know, the other thing I want to point out here to people, you know, the individual land, I've often talked about here, people say that investors will head for the exits. I'm not selling any of my properties. We are in still a very favorable investment landscape here. You know, you can still, interest rates are still, you know, sure, they're going up, but they're still very favorable. Use the leverage. Rents have spiked here. Again, units that we're renting for $2,100 are getting $2,600, $2,700 all day. You know, some of the stories I'm seeing now of, you know, 15 tenants showing up for a showing here, looking to rent, offering more than what the landlord is even asking. I'm seeing landlords telling me now, some of my clients, that some of these people are saying, I'll give you a year's worth of rent up front. I'll wire it to your account. This is what's going on. It's a brutal market out there if you're a tenant, and it's only going to get worse when the NDP is doing these idiotic games with the rent increases. Landlords will raise the rent. Once the tenant's out, they will push it back up. So the little bit you're saving on the rent increase being lower, you're getting crushed on the other end with it. But, you know, mom and pop investors, in my opinion, none of my investors have been selling because, again, there's always going to be investors that are selling for a myriad of reasons. I sell probably 10 condos a year from investors. Most of them they're not my clients. They bought these units 10, 15, 20 years ago. So they've made a good bit of money on it. And a lot of times it's just time to sell. They're retiring or they want to downsize a little bit. Remember what I've told you, that most of the buyers for these units are end users, principal residence buyers. This is something that, again, the media and the NDP just doesn't understand. They don't get it. I have sold so far in 2022 9 investment units that were rented by investors that I listed and sold. All but 2 of them, we got the tenants out with a mutual agreement to end tenancy. It was great. 2 of the tenants stayed, and then we gave them a 2 clear month notice to get out. Of the 9, only 1 was an investor buyer. The other 8 were all end users. So there's 8 more condos that have been taken out of the rental pool. And I know people will say, well, there's always new rentals coming out or people renting, and there is. But overall, I will tell you that the number of quality rentals, because they're the ones, the mom and pop investors are the ones providing the vast majority of the quality housing stock. If you want to rent a detached home, you're dealing with a mom and pop. If you want to rent a luxury condo in Cole Harbour, you're dealing with a small mom and pop individual investor. They're providing most of the quality rental stock here. You know, most of the stuff in the West End is pretty tired. And of the few buildings that have been built, purposely built, there haven't been a lot in downtown. It makes up very little of the market. But, you know, remember that supply of rental units is shrinking when that happens, which just puts more pressure. This is why the rents have been going up. People say, oh, these are good things, keeping the rents low, allowable increases. Well, is it? Have a look. Take your blinders off here. Rents have gone absolutely parabolic here. They've spiked, and the worst isn't over. We're out of COVID now. 40,000 new residents coming into the Lower Mainland every year. Contract workers are back. Students are back renting. And forget about new supply coming on as far as purposely built rentals. Interest rates are going up. People are holding tight to their homes. Sales are down 20%, which just pushes more people into the rental market. People need to realize all the dynamics that are at work here. And, you know, it's inelastic when you do these things. There's a reaction at the other end, which governments like the NDP will never talk. It's like elephant in the room. See what we're doing for you guys. We're only raising allowable rent 2% next year. Yeah, great. But my rent has gone from $2,100 to $2,900. That's what's happening. You have to face the music here. Have a look around at what's happening. New development is done. No developer is going to want to get into bed with a socialist government like the NDP, who's allowing a fraction of what they should be as far as CPI goes. It's ludicrous. The available quality rental stock is shrinking. It's a net loss here. Sure, there's always new investors coming in and people that are living in a residence and maybe moving and renting out their current place. But overall, those numbers have gone down. Look at Craigslist. The proof is in where rental rates are. Remember, rental rates are based on 2 things, supply and demand. When demand outstrips the supply, rentals go up. So it's not even close with the rental spikes we've had here. So I hope this kind of summarizes where we're at. As an investor myself, I'm not losing any sleep over this. I'm going to give the prescribed rate. Eventually, all my tenants move out, and I will raise the rates back up to full market rent. I would also say that, you know, if these type of things actually, you're seeing the proof here, are raising the rental rates up. And I think a lot of landlords are now, if they weren't doing the prescribed increase every year, they are now, which is another nail in the coffin for renters. You know, up until now, for the last 35 years, my tenants had stability. I wasn't raising the rent every year on them. Now I'm going to. 2% next year, and I just gave all my tenants the 1.5% 3-month notice for the increase this year. I wanted to get that in before the end of the year so that I could do the prescribed rate rent increase next year too. So we'll see where it goes. This is government, NDP 101 here. Don't be fooled by this. If you're a renter right now, this should be a wake-up call for you guys. I think if you haven't already been woken up by this, what the current rental market is. Nothing wrong with renting short term, but hook or crook, you should be saving for the down payment to get into ownership. Living in a city like Vancouver long term and renting, you are going to be crushed financially. And the NDP with these type of tricks is just going to make it far worse for you, as you're seeing right now with the current rental market in Vancouver and our current rental rates. I'm Owen Bigland. As always, thanks for watching. Thanks to all my new subscribers. I'll see you next week.